1 a.m. on a Monday night, chapter 12 of my finance textbook. Fourth coffee of the day. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, a question showed up that I didn't particularly want to answer. Am I doing this because I want it or because I still have something to prove? I didn't appreciate the question, mostly because questions that require uncomfortable honesty tend to show up when you're already exhausted, but it wouldn't leave. So this episode is about grad school in my 30s, perfectionism, a professor I didn't exactly see eye to eye with, and a lesson I thought I'd learned more than a decade ago after failing an exam so badly that I reconsidered my entire future. Both stories start with failure. They just end very differently.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Dealing with here. I've spent most of my life proving that I can do hard things. Engineering degree, engineering career, years in a technical field, often walking into rooms where I felt like I had to earn credibility before I'd even open my mouth. And then because apparently I hadn't outgrown the urge to take on one more challenge, I decided my 30s needed an MBA on top of a full-time job and plenty of other responsibilities. I'm over a year into the program now with 2 semesters left and still functioning. The thing is, I've always genuinely liked learning. Structured learning, self-directed learning, random rabbit holes that have absolutely nothing to do with anything. I'm just a very curious person and I want to know all the things. And learning itself was never the problem. The challenge is that I also have a marriage, a very demanding job, family, hobbies, and a life that completely exists outside of work and school. And school, if you let it, it will consume every available hour that you have. So before I started my MBA, I made a promise to myself. This would be important to me. Getting my degree, getting my master's, all of that is important to me, but it would not become my entire identity. That was a much harder promise to keep than I expected. Because here's who I used to be. Undergrad, let's say I'll take you way back. So undergrad, electrical engineering class, junior year, I think it was EE, like 101 or something. Circuits, all those things. There's an exam I will remember for the rest of my life, even though I've completely forgotten what the exam was actually about. But what I do remember is the grade. I didn't do poorly. I failed spectacularly. I don't even remember how bad it was. It's got to be it was probably in the 15, 20, 25%, somewhere around there. So the 20-year-old me didn't think, oh, that was a tough exam. The 20-year-old me thought, I'm not smart enough to be an engineer. I have made a terrible mistake even trying to do something like this. I should probably go quit school and live in the woods, pick another job, pick another career, do a quote unquote safe route, whatever. So one bad grade, and I was prepared to recalculate my entire future around it. Now, if you've ever had that experience, because I know people have, I know women have, I've talked with my friends about this, share your story in the comments below. And I'm curious how you've experienced that, because we've all had it. We've all had that one test, and plural sometimes. I mean, this is just one exam that I failed. And this was the one that failed. I failed so bad that I really reconsidered everything. But there were plenty of other exams that I failed. But we all have that one where we're like, oh, I can't do engineering anymore. Nope, not for me. So the reality was a little less dramatic. And I did the one thing that felt survivable to me. And this was after talking with my family. This was after talking with my advisor. And she was like, Christine, you can take the class again. You can drop it. And I thought dropping a class was like giving up or quitting. And I'm not a quitter because, again, going back to the beginning, I've always wanted to prove that I can do hard things. So quitting is really not in my chemical makeup. But it wasn't quitting. It was just redirecting. It was, okay, we're going to pause on this EE class so you can focus on your other stuff. And then you're going to take it with a different professor who got great reviews on ratemyprofessor.com. And that's what's going to happen. You know, it's okay. Like this was something that I could solve, and it was all right. And I took the class again. The second time around, everything shifted. I mean, I had a different professor, and you know, and in school, whether you're in high school, middle school, college, grad school, like whatever, elementary school, learning is so dependent on how it's taught. And the first professor that I had, I just didn't connect with how he was teaching. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand him. And that was just a barrier. That was the reality of the situation. I couldn't really understand what he was saying. And it was just like, what's going on? What is going on? So yeah, it really has, looking back at it over 10 years later, I mean, when I was in the thick of it, you feel like it is so personal. It is so deeply personal because you're trying to do this thing. You feel all of these different pressures around you. Everyone's looking at you. So that, like the episode that I did last week about the visibility and wanting to hide in my career, like you're already dealing with a lot of stuff. And then on top of that, you're trying to understand your professor. So it's a lot. And it feels, because I was an undergrad and I was so laser focused, I didn't have many other responsibilities. I didn't have the maturity yet, or just the life experience of things. It's no wonder I felt, oh my God, I'm done. I'm done for it. I might as well just pack it in and give up. Yeah, everything shifted. It was, I went to the office hours the next time. The professor was a woman, which was very rare in engineering. I think I had one other woman teacher my entire career, my entire college career. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it. Probably. I mean, not gonna lie, but probably. Yeah, things just clicked. So I got an A. It wasn't just some like redemption story. It was just an A. It was an A that I studied for, I worked for, and yeah. So I would love to tell you that this lesson permanently cured my perfectionism, but unfortunately, that's not how human beings work. The lesson just sat there quietly for the next decade, waiting until I needed it again. So going back to school in your 30s is one of the biggest reality checks perfectionism can get. When you're younger, the goal often feels simple. Get the A, study harder, work longer. And I use that formula all the time. Now I have a full-time job and actual adult responsibilities. And that changes the equation. I've started asking a question that younger me would have hated so badly. What am I actually getting in return for this effort? If I spend 4 extra hours trying to turn a 92% into a 98%, what changes? I still get the degree. I still learn the material. Nobody is offering me $50,000 more to my salary just because one assignment score was slightly higher. I don't even know if that could have changed my GPA. Like that's kind of where I'm thinking. So, and the GPA doesn't even really matter. So my approach has become much more strategic. What do I need to understand? What am I being tested on? What knowledge is actually valuable beyond the classroom? If something genuinely interests me, then sure, I'll go down the rabbit hole voluntarily. But I no longer spend time proving that I can suffer through something simply because it's available to me. Every class demands something different. So for me, business law was very writing heavy. My leadership classes required more reflection and discussion. Consulting became one long team project and with a real life client. Finance was homework, quizzes, formulas, spreadsheets. And then I found the class that ignored every coping mechanism I'd built over the previous year. The class was International Finance. I went into the class thinking, I'm going to explore a finance concentration. I'd done well in my other finance classes that were required classes and the accounting class. And I wanted to see whether that path fit and if that's something that I was interested in. That theory did not survive reality. The material itself was a bit challenging, but the larger problem for me was that the professor's teaching style simply just didn't work for me in my learning. The lectures often left me more confused than informed. And then there were the exam policies. The syllabus said we needed to use lockdown browser software with no notes, no internet, no textbook, no one sheet of paper with all the formulas. Fine. I prepared for a completely closed book exam, which, mind you, is very different in how you study. And I took that really serious because I genuinely think that time is your most valuable resource. And I try to desperately protect that with all I can. And so, yeah, then we were told that notes would be allowed because I'll never forget this. So the day before the exam opened, because usually you have like in grad school, you have like 3 days to do it. And you can take the exam whenever you want. So it opened on like a Friday. And on Thursday, my professor sends us email and says, I asked the dean, because apparently this was a requirement for the coming from the university and like the dean and all that, so that we had to use lockdown browser. And I get why. I mean, they want people to learn, and they don't just want people to, Google stuff or use AI all the time. Like I understand, but there's more to the story than just that. So the day before, he says, I spoke with the dean and I got a special permission to use your note and to not use lockdown browser. And he formed it in a way that I felt was like, I'm doing you guys a favor. Like, I'm giving you this little gift. But I'm like, dude, like, this is not a gift to me. I'm so mad because I just spent 2 weeks memorizing stuff, and my day-to-day life, I was up till whatever 1 a.m. studying, like, sure, did I know the comments better? Probably. But again, like, I'm in grad school and I'm just trying to get through it. I was infuriated. I was very, very upset. So then we take the exam and I did okay. But then a later exam introduced even more confusion around what resources could and couldn't be used. And I remember saying, like, hey, professor, if we have to use lockdown browser, how are we going to use Excel to calculate some of these things? So this was like the night before the exam opened. And he responds back to me with like multiple paragraphs worth of like, you should know this information. It doesn't matter about the software, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, there's actually a glitch in the software. So you guys are going to be able to use your notes again. And I was like, so what? Are you kidding me? So I was like, sure, there was a glitch. Okay, dude, sure. So that really pissed me off. And then at that point, I just felt like I didn't know what to expect. And again, my time Our time is the most valuable thing we have. So I'm very protective of it. So at some point, I genuinely stopped knowing how I was supposed to prepare. The moment that really crystallized everything happened to be during a ski trip. So my husband and I had a long drive ahead of us. So I decided to use that time to study. I put on one of the recorded lectures in our Bluetooth, and a while into it, he looks over to me and asked, "What exactly is this guy talking about?" And honestly, I was so relieved. Not because I wanted him to struggle or be like, what is going on? But my husband is a software engineer, very analytical, very smart, very number savvy. He knows enough about finance and international finance to be dangerous. So I was like, okay, I feel really relieved. And my husband's also someone that learns things very quickly, especially like analytical things. He can kind of just put things together. So that was another factor in this. And I was like, okay, I feel relieved because it reminded me I wasn't imagining this problem. And sometimes the issue is that sometimes the issue isn't that you're incapable of learning something. Sometimes the explanation genuinely just isn't working for you and your learning style. Sometimes the explanation genuinely isn't working for you. And that realization was comforting. It was also very frustrating because I'd spent hours trying to force a process that wasn't helping. And then I failed the exam, which surprised absolutely no one, including me. What surprised me was my reaction. I waited for the hardcore spiral, the old one, the voice that immediately translated every setback into some fundamental law, and it never arrived. Instead, I thought, okay, like, what do I got to do to pass this class? And I went straight to money because my employer is paying for my degree and they reimburse me every semester after I get a C or better. And I was like, okay, what if I fail this class? What do I need to get a C? Okay, what am I going to tell my boss if I get a D in this class and not a C? And, what happens if, okay, I'm out, maybe I just don't get reimbursed. So that doesn't sound too bad. I mean, I'm out a couple $1,000s, but like whatever, So I was just thinking kind of all about the money. So yeah, it made me realize that, it wasn't that I cared less. The difference, I think, was that I no longer treated failure like hard evidence that I needed to redirect my entire life, which takes a lot of time. It takes time to get to that point, and it's not like a forever point. I mean, there's plenty of things that I'm always working through, and this is one of them. I mean, I didn't love failing in class as a 35-year-old. Like I was like, I thought I knew more than this, but it was the reality of the situation. And also, some people might ask, like, why didn't you reach out to your professor and like try to understand the material more? And I think at that point, which is a total valid question if you're thinking that, the issue is that I felt like I was already kind of checked out of the class. I was really kind of frustrated with how he was communicating. And I didn't like how he was teaching in the lecture videos. And I made a big assumption that it could have had a different outcome, like had I gone to see him, but I think I could have just seen how it was going to play out. And he would have just been like, I don't know. I just felt more comfortable and safer in my own little world of like trying to learn the concepts myself. But if I had talked with him and said like, hey, I don't understand what's going on, maybe it would have been a good outcome. So you never know. So then my professor emails me a long email, like multiple paragraphs again. And he starts out with, I'm really concerned about you. And my like antenna goes up. And my first reaction was, I'm offended by this. Like, how dare you reach out to me? It's like, you don't know me? And I immediately told my husband, I was like, I read the email and I was like, oh yeah, this jerk. Oh my God, he's such a ba. And then, he's known this whole journey, this up until this point with the lectures, and the browser lockdown, like he knows the whole drama, he knows the whole storyline. And then he says something. My husband is very wise, and he says things that are always like, he always has the right thing to say to me. And he checks me. He puts me in my place a little bit in a very gentle and loving way. And he says, yeah, like he doesn't know you and maybe you should tell him what's going on. And I was, you're right. Because there's always context. And for me, like I had a demanding stretch at work. I mean, my job is pretty demanding as it is, but there was a stretch that was pretty demanding. I was in a wedding that also was just a bit demanding. I was a bridesmaid. And then my other class, I was taking management consulting, and that was taking up a lot of time, and it involved a group project where a small percentage of the team was doing a very large percentage of the work. So yeah, life was really busy. My husband went to India for work, and that whole experience just kind of rattled me a little bit. There was the day after he landed back in the US, like he had to go through Dubai. And a day later was when Dubai was, the airport was bombed. So I just think like what was going on in the world. I mean, there's always like the world is very, very dark right now, and it has been. So everything just felt really dark and tough. So instead of replying defensively, with my husband's, inspiration and advice, I thanked him for reaching out and being concerned. And I explained to him what was happening. And while I was in the process of reflecting on this whole situation, I felt like I was stumbling into a realization, and that finance wasn't really where I wanted to go. And this was something that I brought up and I added in the email to him. So looking back, I don't think I chose finance solely because I was interested in it. I think part of me chose it because it was difficult in a general objective way, because it was technical, because it was analytical and quantitative, because succeeding at it would prove something, not to anyone else, to me. And that's what finally got my attention. Why was I still doing that? I already had an engineering degree. I had built a technical career. I had spent years, over a decade, demonstrating that I could handle difficult things. And how much more evidence did I actually need? And meanwhile, the feedback that I was getting at work was consistent with that. People saw leadership potential. They saw that I could build teams, develop people, and connect technical work with broader business goals. And somewhere between the email, the failed exam, this comment from my husband, everything was starting slowly to click to me, not in some like big movie moment, magical aha moment. It was just kind of, everything started to kind of make sense a little bit. And my husband likes to say this one phrase that is genuinely something that is like really helped me evaluate a lot of different things. And it's, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Sure, I could pursue finance and I would probably do really well, but it wasn't where I wanted to go, genuinely. I didn't want to be a CFO. I didn't want to be an accountant. I didn't want to get my CPA. I didn't want to be like crunching numbers, I just, not those kinds of numbers, And what I actually want is leadership. I want to connect with teams. I want to build younger engineers' careers and mentor them. And I want to be a manager. So once I admitted that to me, everything it was slowly starting to be a bit lighter. And the most interesting part of this story isn't that I failed a class or failed an exam. It's that I failed in almost the same way twice. 10 years apart, and responded very differently. 20-year-old me treated failure as evidence that I needed to redirect my entire life and career. 30-something me treated failure as information, and that feels like a lot of growth. The perfectionist voice is still in there. That gremlin that says, why don't you get a concentration in finance because it's the hardest, objectively speaking. But, she's a little quieter now, though. She's quieter. She's not like as demanding as the 20-year-old version was. So when she tells me to spend 4 more hours optimizing something, I ask her a question that I never really used to ask. Why? What's the actual benefit to me? And as women, I think we don't always think like that. We don't think about ourselves, and we need to. And it's like, what is the actual benefit to me? Because working hard and like slaving away hours and burning the midnight oil on both ends, not only is it not sustainable, but it's not something that might really benefit you in the long term. And of course, yeah, there's plenty of times where we do have to do that, and we got to put the work in for sure. There's plenty of things that I can think of that, yeah, I need to show up, and I need to bust my ass in this. But I think we also, and I'm including myself in this because this is like a relatively new thing for me. But what is the actual benefit? And am I working towards something that's meaningful to me? Or am I just trying to prove something again? And it's tough because, as women in STEM, women in engineering, women in business, like we spend so long proving ourselves to other people out of a survival mode. So it's hard to kind of like detach from that because that is a coping mechanism. That's a way that kind of like is a survival skill. So it's hard to be like, oh, I don't need to do that anymore. When do you pump the brakes on that? It's hard. But this is one of the most useful lessons that I've been learning. And underneath all of this is the thing that I understand a little bit more now. Just because you can do the hardest version of something doesn't mean that you have to. You can be capable of something and still decide that it isn't the life that you want. And guess what? That's allowed. It's allowed and it's okay. So that's the episode for today. What sticks with me about this story isn't the grade. It isn't even the class. It's realizing how often we chase things because we're trying to prove that we're capable way long after we've already proven it. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't taking on another challenge. It's admitting that you don't actually want the challenge in the first place. And let's be clear, I love a good challenge. Don't get me wrong. But it's more about, do you really want it? So I'm curious, what is something that you were completely capable of doing, but ultimately decided it wasn't the right path for you? I'd love to hear your story. Reach out on social media. So she's been through some shit on Instagram, or leave a comment wherever you're listening. If you're listening on Spotify, feel free to use the comments below, or YouTube as well. And if this episode resonated with you, I'd really appreciate your help growing this show. Follow or subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Turn the bell on so that you can get alerted when there's a new episode. And if you're listening on Spotify, take a moment to leave a rating or review. Those small actions really make a big difference in helping new listeners discover this podcast. And if there's someone in your life who's carrying the weight of constantly trying to prove themselves, share this episode with them. Sometimes we just need that reminder that just because you can doesn't mean you have to, or you should. So thank you so much for listening. And just remember, keep challenging and questioning the outdated career advice that we all received and somehow absorbed, but that no longer serves us. Talk to you next time.
1, 2.